Toby Fox is perhaps the most famous indie game developer other than Notch, but unlike Notch, Toby is notorious for completely different reasons. His success was practically the archetype for most following indie hits, starting with a huge Kickstarter campaign, years of work, and then a release that was skyrocketed to success through word of mouth and Let's Players. But I'm not going to be recounting the story today. No, instead, I want to take a look at the lead up to Undertale's development, tracing a timeline by compiling various interviews that Mr. Fox has given, some of his old internet presence, and a surprising amount of appearances in Japanese magazines. Just a warning, but there will be some spoilers for Undertale and Deltarune as the video goes on. In this video, I'm going to be looking through all the public art that Dr. Fox has published, and it all starts, as most things do, with RPG Maker. Toby first experienced Earthbound at the ripe old age of 4, with his older brother introducing him to the game, and all of his older brothers continued to be instrumental in influencing Toby's early taste in games, and they even introduced him to game development with RPG Maker 2000. And throughout several interviews, Toby has consistently brought up the influence of his older brothers on him, with his eldest brother creating a game called New Genesis, which had serious and comedic elements that were blended together perfectly. And the game featured both Toby as a character and someone named Rouse, who would inspire Toby to repurpose this name into Rouse, a name that you might just be familiar with. Toby was portrayed as a pirate who was small, had extremely fast animations, and whose skill set revolved around annoying everyone around him. So he's basically the average younger brother. But in the interview that I'm sourcing this from, Toby highlights one moment in particular that really informs his game development style going forwards. Another one of Toby's older brothers created a game called Endless Opera, and it was a goofy parody game that was filled with weird sequences. For example, the game starts off with a player trapped in a prison, but then a mini version of In the Navy by the village people starts to play and a rabbit breaks you out of prison. There's also a part where you have to walk through an orphanage as there are about 50 NPC boys chasing you and shouting, "Wow, we have a guest." And it's apparently very difficult to get through. But the important sticking point for Toby, beyond all the goofing moments, the important part that he took away from it was that at a point, his older brother decided to finish the game and give it an ending. The ending was rushed, with all the players' party members instantly leveling up to level 50 and then heading off to beat the boss. But unlike all the other games that his older brothers and Toby had been trying to make, this game ended. And Toby realized that in order to finish the game, he and his brothers had to be realistic. Instead of trying to make the next Final Fantasy, he would just keep his games at a reasonable scope. And in the 2015 Fangamer interview, years after this, one of his #1 selling points of Undertale was that it was an RPG that he would still be able to play through and enjoy himself. One that wasn't 60 hours long and didn't waste your time or try to have too huge of a scope. Just a story that can be experienced in a fairly short amount of time. And if anybody here wants to be a game developer or is learning right now, then yes, this is the absolute best advice. When you're starting out, make small games. Then you can start making slightly bigger ones, though if you're a solo dev, I still advise against ever trying to make anything too massive. It's just a huge time investment, and as a game developer myself, I've found that I make my best games when I focus on something smaller and make it as good as I can. Yume Nikki and Off are two other RPG Maker games that Toby has referenced as influences for him. Yume Nikki is a Japanese game that was released in 2003 and updated up until 2004. It takes place in a maze-like dream and has no dialogue. It's more of a walking simulator that makes great use of environmental storytelling. It can be a pretty creepy game at times. And Yume Nikki and its developer are overall quite the enigma. Off, on the other hand, is a Belgian RPG created in 2008 that has a mix of real-time and turn-based combat. It has an eerie and unique atmosphere and a bunch of puzzles. While Yume Nikki's influence is a bit harder to see in his work, Toby did happen to conduct the only interview ever with its creator, Kihiyama. However, with Off, Toby has cited many ways that it's influenced his games, including a very recent 2025 interview. And apparently Papyrus' influence was originally based on the Off boss, Dedan, which is more clear in early designs for Papyrus. And Sans' general personality was based on a character named Zachary, who was a friendly guy who shows up throughout the adventure. And also the jazzy music for Nasty Book's fight was also influenced by Off, which largely used jazz music in its original soundtrack. And speaking of which, the old soundtrack for Off, made by Elias Conrad Cold Word, is super unique. It's jazzy, dark, and greatly enhances the atmosphere of the game. But Off is getting a 2025 remake/remaster thing that will actually be releasing the month this video comes out. Unfortunately, the old soundtrack won't be included in this release. Nevertheless, this resulted in a new soundtrack being made for the game, with composers including Camellia and Toby Fox. So it's pretty neat to get this new set of music for the game. And it's also pretty neat to see a game that influenced Toby for so long be contributed to by Toby in this new version. But Toby's most notable early presence on the internet was on Starman.net, a forum dedicated to Earthbound and Earthbound fan games, or projects similar to Earthbound. There's a lot of stuff that he posted on here, but the vast majority is either lost or Toby would like it to be lost. He purged his account and history from the website after releasing Undertale, which does make sense. He posted there from a very young age, and it's likely that there was some personal information and just immature stuff they didn't want to be found. Still, there are some recordings of old joke games that were made of GameMaker, and more notably, the Earthbound Halloween hack was made for a Halloween contest on this very website. So while Toby isn't super proud of this era of his online presence, it's also clear how being in this community of Earthbound fans and game developers further influenced him in its game development and music production journey. Forums really used to make up a fascinating quarter of the old internet, especially whenever it came to niche interest and hobbies, so it's a bit sad that they're dying out nowadays. Up to now, I haven't actually had much of Toby's art to discuss, as it's mostly just been descriptions he's given in interviews and such. And while there has been a little bit of work that has been found in videos and stuff, it's mostly jokes. So now let's get to the biggest public game project that Toby Fox took on before Undertale, and start to really get an idea of what his early artistry was like. So, the Earthbound Halloween hack, aka press the B button. I've actually never seen it referred to by that name, but it's what Toby called it on his old website dedicated to the hack. This hack is a lot, but first of all, I think its creation illustrates a simple fact. Toby is not a bad developer. It seems to be a common belief nowadays that he was, at least when he made Undertale, a bad programmer, and there is some truth to that, as the game is largely held together by duct tape and if-else statements. Overall, if you do look through the code, it really does look like a game built by someone who is learning programming as they go, and didn't really know how to structure a relatively large game like Undertale. Reminds me a bit of my early development with my first big game, Couch Combat. However, the technical knowledge that was needed to make something like the Halloween hack is seriously impressive. And Toby outlines it all through writing out HTML and also through this now deleted page on his website dedicated to the game. Earthbound ROM hacking had tools back in 2008 whenever he made it, but they were pretty hard to use and cobbled together. Basically, you can imagine the original Earthbound team making an SNES game on a relatively small budget and timeline, designing a system that they only intended to use for this one game for a console release in 1990. Now, imagine a tool developed in the years since this that was created by basically reverse engineering SNES ROM into a tool that somewhat replicates the tools used by the original developers in the 90s. It's a flimsy foundation to build the game upon, especially back in 2008 whenever he was making this. Toby compares ROM hacking to its attempting to excavate the ruins of ancient long-lost civilization using only a small set of tools. Also, the ruins are made of crumbly graham crackers, and the explorer's hands are made of atom bombs. Changing just about anything in the game would result in corruption and changes elsewhere, so there's a lot of little effects and problems in the game. And another good point in comparison with the development of this game is the fact that the Earthbound Halloween hack had a few original songs in it that Toby made for the game and put into the ROM. And this is very impressive, not just because Toby made his own music, but because it was insanely hard to hack new music into Earthbound, with a lead hacker and translator from Mother 3, Clyde Mandolin, being surprised that Toby was able to include music in the hack. That's how rare it was. So yeah, while he might have not been the best programmer, Toby had that sort of technical know-how that was really only possible to gain after spending countless hours fiddling with the worst tools and programs known to man back in the 2000s. A skill set which is practically extinct in the modern day. Not to mention the amount of planning that was necessary to design a full game in these limitations. But enough glazing. And interestingly, beyond the game and the page dedicated to introducing it on his website, there is also an HTML file included with the game that covers the behind the scenes and making up the game. So let's go through the game and follow along in the behind the scenes to get a full picture of what Toby wanted to make and what he ended up making. I think one of the most interesting things about this hack is the way Toby approached it, as he wanted to make a scary game that people wouldn't think was scary. He thought of his reputation on the Starman.net forums as generally a funny guy, so he wanted to take advantage of that reputation to catch some people off guard. The start of the game in the town is very fall themed, and generally a little funny. It's supposed to make you feel at home and like you're surrounded by characters who are nice, to get you a little invested. And then you go out into the forest. And Toby states that these areas, the forest and the sewers, are supposed to feel pretty lazy to anyone who has experience with Earthbound and Earthbound ROM hacking. There are some changes, but it's mostly just recolors of enemies, and it also reuses a lot of scenes in the game. He states that he really wanted to lower the player's expectations in a subtle, secret way. But then you enter a new area in the sewers, an area introduced with a long, disturbing description. And this area obviously has a lot more effort put into it. New enemies, actions, and art, it suddenly starts to be something real, and according to Toby, all this effort was put into making it as disturbing as possible. I think it's interesting to compare this to Undertale, which as a whole is built with this intended laziness that Toby very carefully made sure to sprinkle everywhere. There are lots of unused sprites and animations that Toby thought were too good for Undertale, and it does create a really unique effect for Undertale, making a game that is beautiful in many ways, but amateur in other often intended ways. And so with Undertale, it really helps to make this game have an incredible sense of sincerity, and makes moments like the final fight with Azrael stand out all the more. But in the Halloween hack, this amateurness is instead used to further the horror elements that Toby wants to push. It lowers your guard, and then throws you right into the deep end. And in the next area, Winter's the Land of Doom, the game plays with your expectations again. making you think that you're reaching the end of the game and the hack is almost over. The game is really tough at this point, and the only way to survive against the most difficult monsters is to kill desperate survivors, who are enemies who are much weaker and who drop food, but who are also supposed to make you pity them. And they run from you if they can. And yeah, you can really see the DNA of the genocide route already taking form here. It seems that making you feel bad for fictional video game characters is a long-time passion for Mr. Fox. And the way that the player is informed about things in the environment is also pretty interesting, with the narration urging you to kill anyone in your way, labeling them all as monsters. And in the lab, the final area for the game, you finally come face to face with Dr. Andonus, the big bad guy, who turns out to be absolutely crazy, but also absolutely terrified of Varric, the player character. He escapes into a machine, and you kill him and the game ends. Of course, this isn't actually the end, as there's secretly the option to press the B button. Oh, that's what the title's for. And not kill him. And this secret just so happens to make the game 3 times longer. So you enter a weird mindscape sort of place called Maggie-Sant, where the tone of the game shifts drastically. It's no longer scary, but it's not all that welcoming either. It's more off-kilter and also pretty obviously a fake reality. And so you travel through this reality made of Dr. Andonus' memories. And yeah, this definitely does remind me of Dark Worlds. It seems that Toby was playing with this concept for a while before. But as you travel through his memories, things become more and more scrambled. You cross through WhyNot, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, the town from the start of Earthbound, but it's empty, filled with weird colors, and a lot of the tiles don't fit together too well. And you fight this boss called No, who doesn't seem like much right now other than a mishmash of sprites, but who actually has a secret meaning that's pretty interesting, but I'll get to that later. And you continue through his memories, and they get more and more distorted. And finally, you enter the Sea of Eve, a strange mishmash of tiles and memories. It's really difficult and really isolating. Plus, you fight a bunch of amalgams, and combining multiple sprites of enemies together into a big mess of parts does make sense for a ROM hack. And Toby would clearly take this idea into Undertale, so it's cool to see where it started from here. He then returned the Tucson town, which is pretty interesting, as it's no longer from the fading memories of Dr. Andonut, but rather from the memories of Varric. And the tone of the game here is once again much nicer, with people treating Varric pretty kindly for only the second time in this whole game. And finally, you face off against the final boss, but you're reduced to an 8-bit form. Once again, parallels to Chapter 3 in Deltarune are clear. And in the Halloween hack, this throwback was intended by Toby to denote a huge loss of power and speed. It shows you that you're totally and utterly powerless. It also makes my heart hurt for a reason I don't understand. And when you finally walk up to the boss, the sprite used is based on Yuboa from Yume Nikki, which is a pretty cool reference. And this final boss is perhaps the most famous part of this hack. For the first section, you fight against the evil being named Id, who really doesn't want to die. He's actually the same guy as Dr. Andonut, but he's called Id right now, because that's apparently a reference to something. But this fight is an interesting dichotomy, as earlier you were killing things that were normal but were terrified of dying, and those fights were supposed to make you feel guilty. But now you're fighting something terrible, but also still just as afraid of their mortality. Id deserves to die, but it also shows that you become something as horrifying as it, or perhaps even more, as it fears you. But then Id transforms, and you finally fight Dr. Argonaut. And he basically just starts swearing and has some of the most goofily edgy dialogue I've ever read, ending with the ever iconic line, TLDR, eat shit, F slurs. And then Megalovania starts to play. So yeah, this is inadvertently hilarious. Well, reading through the plans, it seems that he was supposed to be kind of a weird mix between badass and pathetic. Just some dude going nuts at the end of his life and putting up a pretty good fight, but looking like a complete idiot while doing it. And to touch on it, yeah, I can kind of see why Toby is kind of embarrassed by this game. There are many cool ideas and genuinely great moments. It really feels like a high schooler had a bunch of crazy, weird ideas and then put hundreds of hours of efforts to bring his uncompromised vision to life. But yeah, it really feels like the writing of a high schooler who doesn't have much experience. It's unrefined. A lot of the dialogue is kind of bad, overly dramatic, and just edgy, and kind of a product of its time. I think the game is most interesting as a look into the early work of Toby Fox. But seriously, it's all too easy to deify someone like Toby and hold up all of his art as perfect. And while Undertale and Deltarune are pretty close to perfect in my opinion, there are also so many points when these games could have gone off the rails and become a lot like this ROM hack. All of his games take a ton of risk and huge swings, and unfortunately in this ROM hack, it rarely fully lands any of them, but it still results in a work that is absolutely fascinating, and overall I think it's a pretty good example of how someone can work their way up to making a game or story like Undertale. The Earthbound hack takes heavily from an established work story, mechanics, and characters, and builds something weird with it. It takes a lot of risks, and then years and years later, Toby salvages many of the most important ideas, songs, and themes from this little ROM hack and builds Undertale, and later Deltarune. Obviously the process is not as clean as I'm describing. I'm sure there are a lot more half-finished projects, thousands of hours of practice and work that would never see the light of day. But I am thankful that we can still take a look at the Halloween hack and enjoy it in all of its edgy jank to this day. Oh yeah, and there's also one other important theme in this hack that might just be relevant to Deltarune: a lack of choice. As Toby outlines in the making of document, there really is no choice in this game. From the moment you start to the moment you finish, you're destined to kill Dr. Andonuts. There are 2 endings, but they both eventually end up the same way. It's all a big joke on the player. And yeah, you can see this all throughout the game. You can only go forwards, never backwards, and finishing the quote, the only real choice, as Varric realizes by the end of the game, is to stop or keep going. By stop, he means turn off the game. And that's all you can do. Anything you play is your own fault for playing, and that's the only real choice you can make. If people thought Undertale was kind of unfair for punishing you for playing the game like a normal RPG, or dislike that Chris seemingly hates you in Undertale for controlling their body, then imagine if you weren't even given the choice of killing or sparing. All you can do in this game is put off the inevitable. And also, at the end of the behind the scenes, Toby Fox just reveals that in this game's canon, Dr. Andonuts is gay. That's why he went insane. He repressed his sexuality, married his wife left him because he was terrible at being married to her. His wife dies, and he tries to help his son by sending him back into the past on a different timeline, and he ends up permanently separating him from his son and his friends. So then he goes insane and almost ends the world. Toby didn't want to just come out and say it, and he wanted it to be a more subtle thing. And he hints in it throughout dialogue and the first boss, No, which are just pictures of abs and man stuff. And finally, he ends this behind the scenes with Believe It. So I guess he had a sort of Naruto thing going on here. And yeah, that's all for the hack. I honestly think that the behind the scenes document is at least as interesting as the game itself. But one thing I'll note is that he is very proud of the game in this document, which, yeah, it sounds like this was an insane endeavor and he deserved to be proud, which does make it kinda sad that he now avoids the game, but I can also see why he avoids it. It's a weird, messy, fascinating piece of fan work that is the most complete peek into Toby's art and mind before Undertale, but yeah, he was really young when he made this. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I know almost nothing about Homestuck. I will say, everything that I have seen about it strikes me as maybe the most early 2010s internet thing of all time. But obviously, Toby Fox's biggest project before Undertale was his involvement with the Homestuck music team. The Homestuck music team started out as a very disorganized group of pretty much anybody who agreed to make music for Homestuck. But as the webcomic went on, the group began to shed members who weren't as interested, and eventually invited some musicians who were from the fan community around Homestuck, with Toby Fox joining them in late 2009. So let's listen to some of the work that Toby made during this area. Even some of his earliest work from Homestuck is genuinely great, with his victory jingle from Volume 4 being a great example of his chiptune sound and just how good he is at creating a melody and then evolving it. And I especially like this moment. And the next track, Savior of the Waking World from Volume 5, is cited by Toby as a turning point for him as a musician. It remixes an earlier song from Homestuck called Doctor, and would eventually inspire him to make another medium in Undertale. It's an unmistakably Fox-like track, with that grand feeling from all the orchestral instruments that he often uses. And of course, the moment near the end, whenever it all pulls back to focus on the core melody on a piano, one of Toby Fox's most common touches. And there's also this song, which sounds a lot like Castlevania or a YS song in my opinion. You know, other than the guy who keeps yelling now. So this next song, Sunsetter, is kinda notable for sounding a bit like Hammer of Justice in Deltarune Chapter 4. But I think what's more interesting is that there is an unused ska version, featuring Toby Fox singing a ska version of the song. Maybe this is the religious ska that Asriel listens to in Deltarune. And honestly, Toby Fox's voice works pretty well for ska or pop punk. I hope this song is played when Asriel finally shows up in Deltarune, because that'd be funny. Dave's Sprite from Volume 8 is another one of my favorites. It's funky and has great instrumentation, bass guitar, and melody. It sounds a lot like a Chapter 2 Deltarune song, and I love it for that. Oppa Toby style, despite its goofy name, is kind of insane. The super fast-paced synths really hit me as a Castlevania-inspired song is first. Then it changes it up into some stadium rock thing, with chanting, a distorted rhythm guitar, and some really cool solos. Then it all falls away for a second before coming in again. For just about any other Toby Fox song, it would end right here, but it just keeps going with new section after new section. It's a seriously ambitious song, even if I kinda think it falls off a lot after this first 2 minutes or so. And finally, Penumbra Phantasm, an unused track. This one is also pretty well known in the Deltarune community, as it sounds a lot like the Gaster motif. A lot of people thought that it would be used in Deltarune. That might be off the table, as Toby did say that there would be no music originally composed for Homestuck used in Deltarune. This means the song will not be on Deltarune, unless this was originally composed for Deltarune, as there is the chance that Toby has been playing Deltarune since this time. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The song itself is cool, but it does seem kinda unfinished as it is just piano. Still, it's very energetic and could be amazing with proper instrumentation, and it's got one of the best build-ups throughout the second half of the song out of any of Toby's work. So, what do we learn from listening to all that music? Well, it turns out that Toby has been cracked at composing for a very long time. Who could have guessed? But you can really hear him experiment and grow as a musician over the more than 100 songs that he made for Homestuck. There's also a lot of melodies that he hasn't returned to, so it would be cool to see if he brings some of these back for Deltarune and beyond. But back to the history of the Homestuck music team. With Toby's joining, 2010 marked a high point for the Homestuck music team, with the core members assembled and all of them individually working on music for the series. And in some later interviews, many members would go on to cite this era, which was when Volume 6 of the webcomic was being released, as the best era to be making music for Homestuck. But over time, approaching 2011 or so, the head of Homestuck, Andrew Hussey, began to withdraw from the team as a whole and more so communicate just with Toby Fox, who ended up making a lot of later music and was basically made into the de facto leader of the music group. And as the webcomic came to an end, so did the music team. Hype Swap is a Homestuck game released in 2017 that primarily featured music by James Roach, but Toby Fox also composed some songs for it as well. But overall, with the main creator of Homestuck basically being done with the series at this point, it seems that all the projects related to it have basically come to a stop. I Miss You was a collaborative album that included a bunch of tribute music for Earthbound, released in 2012, and Toby Fox has 4 whole tracks on it. First off, Fallen Down. Yes, that Fallen Down originates here, as well as the slightly infamous Megalo Strikes Back. So no, this is not Kara's theme. No, it's not related to Undertale or to Deltarune, at least not yet. But it is likely that Toby wrote this song is a sequel to Megalopania, which had already been featured in several of his past projects and at this point would obviously go on to be an Undertale. Fallen Down is slightly different to the final Undertale song, but it, alongside the other Earthbound-inspired tracks, definitely sounds similar to how Undertale's music ended up being. And now in 2012, it's finally time to talk a bit about Undertale. The oldest remnants of Undertale seem to reside in an old Starman.net thread about an Earthbound ROM hack called Underbound by a member named Mr. Tenna. Now, there's a lot of confusion online about this post, with many people believing that Mr. Tenna and Toby Fox were being completely serious in this thread, and that Undertale really started out as an Earthbound hack and a continuation to Mr. Tenna's lost game. But no, Underbound was a joke. Its description is a parody of a bunch of things, and the screenshot is a recolor of another hack called Unearthed. And this was all confirmed by Hyperbound, who is the developer of Unearthed and some other games. However, it is true that this is the very first appearance of Undertale, with a Froghead battle screen, Flowey, and Frisk. Most of the text descriptions for these seem to be jokes, with Toby Fox stating that somehow he made a SNES ROM have a higher resolution and a higher quality audio, with 256MB ROMs, which would have been an increase of about 8,500% size of a normal SNES ROM, so that's pretty impressive. The player is a step-cousin of Squeezo, and something tragic happens to your mom in Undertale. So yeah, the earliest appearance of Undertale is appropriately nonsensical. And after this point, Toby developed a demo for Undertale, and during this development, he started working with Timmy. And the way they met is pretty funny. Basically, Toby saw some of Timmy's work on Tumblr, sent her a DM to ask if she would help, she agreed, and that was that. Undertale's core duo was formed. As for the actual development of Undertale, there have already been some great videos made over it. I'll link to the video by that guy Glenn that covers everything really well. But at this point, I now reached the point where we are no longer talking about Toby Fox before Undertale, so it's time to wrap it up. So skip forward and Undertale releases. It sells a sanzillion copies. The insane impact of Undertale's success has been covered many times before, especially in another incredible video by Super Eyepatch Wolf that I'm sure most of you have seen at this point. But after Undertale's release and subsequent massive success, Toby would quickly slip out of public sight, completely abandoning physical appearances to instead appear only as a little pixel art dog, even using text-to-speech instead of his voice. I think it's interesting that a lot of people compare him to a Japanese game dev or mangaka, as it's common for them to hide their identity and avoid fame. But I think that this is just the obvious choice for any normal person who happens to become famous off their work. Fame apparently sucks, and fans of things like video games, manga, and especially Undertale are kind of insane. So Toby disconnecting was definitely the best move. Either way, nowadays Deltarune is still slowly being released, chapter by chapter, and I can definitely say that his work has had a bigger influence on me at this point than any other artist. Undertale basically defined my time in middle school, and though I had already decided I wanted to make video games, Undertale let me know exactly what sort of game I want to make. Even if in actuality my current game projects are absolutely nothing like Undertale, that combination of characters, gameplay, and story is such a perfect ideal that I can't help but aspire towards it. So yeah, check out my game Mythomania if you're interested in an action platformer roguelike inspired by games like Hollow Knight and featuring gods and monsters from all sorts of mythologies from around the world. I think overall this video was a pretty interesting look through a ton of art. I hope it was entertaining and maybe a little informative, but thanks for watching. Bye.
So bow at my knees, I got that PK freeze, cause I'm chiller than the rest, like nighttime stuffiness, yeah!